Recording. Excellent. Muy bien, pues vamos a empezar esta sesión con nuestro muy distinguido invitado del día de hoy, el doctor Roger Ekirch. Roger, bueno, ahora viste de gala este seminario, pienso, es mi humilde opinión. Es un autor galardonado, muy reconocido, profesor universitario distinguido en el Departamento de Historia de Virginia Tech en Estados Unidos. Y su investigación, cosa relativamente rara en el campo de historia, antropología, sociología, etcétera, ha tenido un impacto también en la clínica del sueño. Entonces, eso me parece muy admirable, ¿no? Sus estudios han tenido implicaciones para el estudio de los trastornos del sueño moderno y su investigación ha aparecido en distintos artículos destacados. Desde 2018, el profesor Ekirch ha impartido clases en el programa de maestría en medicina del sueño en el Departamento de Neurociencias de Clínicas de Oxford, y eso a mí me parece muy admirable. Por tanto, estoy muy contenta de darle la bienvenida a esta sesión del seminario y estoy segura de que todos podremos aprender mucho de su trabajo, y también a los interesados en realizar este tipo de estudios sobre pues, historia de la ciencia, pues que tengan el referente de que es posible, y también la noción un poco de las herramientas metodológicas con las que el profesor Ekirch ha realizado su trabajo. Así es que sin más dilación, le pediré a Roger que comience a compartirnos su plática. Roger, it's a pleasure having you here, and yeah, you have the floor. Yeah, exactly.
Well, at a political banquet in Washington, D.C., several years ago, the master of ceremonies on the stage informed the guests that the evening speaker, a recent president of the United States, needed no introduction, but that he had insisted on one. Please allow me to emphasize that however much I appreciate Dr. Silva's introduction, I did not request, much less demand, such a gracious welcome. Thank you very much, Professor Silva, for your kind words. I am deeply flattered to have been invited to speak at this distinguished university. Over the past 2 decades, historians joined by anthropologists, sociologists, literary critics have discovered the scholarly importance of sleep. With the rapid growth of sleep medicine as a field of clinical study and practice, historians in particular have awakened to this vital commonplace of everyday life. Notwithstanding the traditional association that sleep has with indolence and lethargy, in marked contrast to the volatility of life's waking hours. In the wake of a growing number of books, articles, master's theses, doctoral dissertations. We can no longer lament with the 18th century writer Samuel Johnson, and I quote, that so liberal and impartial a benefactor as sleep should meet with so few historians. Among other discoveries, sleep, we now know, has varied considerably over time and place, owing to differences in its structure, its length, its distribution, and ecology. Scarcely a biological constant. It has been influenced by numerous circumstances, not least cultural attitudes and technology. For historians of early modern Europe and North America in particular, interest has been particularly devoted to the role of dreams in pre-industrial life, just as revealing, according to popular opinion centuries ago, of prospects ahead as dreams were of times past. There are many, and I quote, whose waking thoughts are wholly employed on their sleeping ones, observed a London contributor to the newspaper The Spectator in 1712. No less important has been historical interest in the prevalence of sleep deprivation among the lower classes. The frequent complaint of among masters on both sides of the Atlantic that servants were inherently lazy stemmed instead from their abysmal living conditions, including nights fending off frigid temperatures or suffocating heat, leaking roofs, and the unholy trinity of early modern entomology, as I prefer to call it, lice, bedbugs, and fleas. Not to mention, of course, illness, depression, and anxiety that kept people awake at night. What relevance, in turn, does the experience of sleep in past centuries have to our lives today? If anything, connections would appear to be weak, all the more in light of history's shortcomings in the eyes of modern science. As grave robbers, historians are forced by the nature of their profession to exhume written notes, maps, paintings, and other artifacts. Many of these have survived not because of their typicality, but due instead to their durability and their intrinsic value, or because they were in fact little read or otherwise used. Then too, government records, owing to bureaucratic priorities, inevitably outnumber private manuscripts from the past, whereas both bureaucratic records and personal diaries and letters, as you all know, are weighted heavily in favor of literate often well-to-do populations. Given such handicaps, pressing questions that historians would like to ask of the past often have to go unanswered. Unlike social scientists, we are prevented from devising surveys and polls bound only by our own imaginations, nor, due to the incomplete nature of most historical evidence, do our conclusions possess the statistical precision of the social sciences, much less the methodological rigor of the hard sciences. Guilty as charged. And yet the advantages of studying human behavior in earlier cultures, I like to believe, often compensate for history's drawbacks. Although not all questions are answerable, so vast is history's domain that ingenuity and imagination have frequently succeeded in illuming seemingly impossible questions. To take but one example that no doubt many of you are familiar with, no North American subject, historical subject in recent decades has been studied more intensively or produced more award-winning books in the United States than African American slavery. In addition to accounts left by whites whose biases are not inescapable, scattered texts written by former slaves, and court records. In addition to all of these, there exist newspapers beginning in the 18th century on into the 19th century that printed thousands of advertisements for those who were typically referred to as runaway slaves, containing at times detailed descriptions of their ages, names, West African origins, gender, height, weight, marital status, scars, clothing, destinations, and there are specific reasons for absconding. From such abundant data, historians have been able to gain a far more sophisticated understanding of the complex world that generations of slaves, not just their white masters and overseers, constructed, including the nature of their sleep. Notwithstanding a Jamaican slave proverb, sleep has no massa. Sleeping conditions for most slaves in the Western Hemisphere generally, like those of many white laborers, were horrible. In an age in which sleep in general was poor, none were more vulnerable than African American slaves to the consequences of sleep deprivation. The famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass observed in the 19th century that more slaves are whipped for oversleeping than for any other fault. Then also, the passage of time affords researchers an ever-changing backdrop in all of its rich diversity, one by which to analyze strong tendencies of human behavior, a unique opportunity enabling historians to chart trends over both time and space, to determine, in essence, what are more apt to be the probabilities rather than the possibilities in our quest for understanding. History, to cite a saying frequently attributed to Mark Twain, doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. Moreover, most historical evidence, if not always detailed, is nonetheless based on empirical reality rather than on theoretical models, laboratory experiments, or analogies conflating the present and the past by drawing conclusions about ancient patterns of human behavior on the basis of modern populations. Notwithstanding revealing evidence, revealing references to human slumber in classical sources, not until the introduction of the movable type printing press in the late Middle Ages would the topic of sleep generate unprecedented quantities of written evidence, accessible today to modern historians. Already by the 17th century, for example, a large majority of farmers and skilled artisans, to take but one example, we know in the English countryside, were indeed literate. Households, we also know, went to great lengths, more even than today, to ensure not only the quality, but also the safety of their slumber. Plays, medical texts, letters, and diaries all bore witness to the centrality of sleep, as did magazines, newspapers, and novels beginning in the 1700s. Rather than an uneventful hiatus, an absence of activity between episodes of daily consciousness, sleep's importance was widely acknowledged, with 7 to 8 hours typically prescribed by early physicians. Among its other beneficial effects, according to a medical treatise written in 1607, sleep strengthen all spirits, comfort the body, taketh away sorrow, and assuageth furies of the mind. Whereas instances of sleepwalking and narcolepsy captivated public attention centuries ago, of more concern to individuals than such aberrations, such disorders, was the safety and tranquility of their own sleep, for which they recited prayers, invoked magical spells, searched for bugs, drank alcohol, and imbibed potions, All this after first setting loose watchdogs, locking doors and shutters, banking the hearths of their fireplaces, and readying weapons to ward off intruders. Poor sleep, deemed an Elizabethan poet, Nicholas Breton, was one of the greatest miseries in the life of man. But such information, however interesting to some of us, is such information of any practical relevance to sleep scientists today? Despite the passage of time, how might history help to inform our current understanding of human slumber? We might begin by acknowledging that never before in history have most people in contemporary Western societies enjoyed better conditions for quality sleep. Certainly, any lingering pangs of nostalgia for darker, less noisy nights, in case you're going on a camping expedition for the weekend, any lingering pangs of nostalgia owing to modern innovations are misplaced. Modern innovations that people could not even dream about 200 years ago. Innovations in the quality of home construction, climate control with heating, air conditioning, and of course, medical care. Notwithstanding contemporary studies, and I think we've read them all, or some, that have chronicled the modern toll exacted by our jobs and our domestic chores and responsibilities. Many sources of sleep deprivation today are a behavioral choice that we make in this 24/7 world of ours. Technology, laptops, television, smartphones, video games are partly to blame. But our addiction, and I include myself, to seductive electronic screens, which both shorten and disrupt our sleep, that's the result of personal preference. Just like drinking too much alcohol and caffeine, or working late at night when one really does not have to. Before the Industrial Revolution, sleep deprivation was less a consequence of choice than the inevitable result of living conditions under primitive, living under primitive conditions. Diaries frequently record restless, disturbed, or dreadful nights, quote unquote. A 17th century prayer refers to the, quote, horrors, visions, noises, dreams, and sorrows that afflict many people during sleep. One was never more vulnerable during the night to fire, thieves, or Satan's demons during sleep. This was, after all, from the late Middle Ages to the early 18th century, the height of the so-called witchcraft craze, for which thousands of suspected witches were put to death on both sides of the Atlantic, particularly in southwestern Germany and Scotland. A 17th century prayer refers, and I quote, to the horrors, visions, noises, dreams, and sorrows that afflict many people during sleep. And because penicillin or painkillers, analgesics, aspirin were available, not available until modernity, illnesses now considered minor, such as the common head cold, kept people awake throughout the night. In the 18th century, the intensity of the pain caused by a toothache made a minister in Massachusetts and New England smear his face with a mixture which he thought would solve the toothache, smear his face with a mixture of lard and manure one night. As he wrote the next morning in his diary, repulsive as it may seem, I was relieved. Presumably, he had more to worry about than a toothache. Then, too, sleep was disturbed by depression and anxiety, including real and imagined fears, especially among the poor, who frequently had to sleep outdoors at the sign of the star. That was the French expression for being forced to sleep outside. The sign of the star. But forgive me, I'm digressing. In short, unlike most people in past centuries, we frequently have only ourselves to blame for our current epidemic of sleep deprivation, as newspapers and magazines so often term our exhaustion during the day. It's not uncommon that when we awaken in the morning, we feel more tired than when we go to bed at night. Past descriptions of sleep disorders also promise to add to our knowledge. REM sleep behavior disorder, sometimes referred more generally to as sleep violence, has been of late a particular topic of interest for lawyers and physicians. I myself suffer from a minor case of this disorder. In addition to clinical research. The disorder was first diagnosed in the 1980s, by the way. Historical evidence has been instrumental in verifying the existence of sleep violence, notwithstanding the doubts of judges, juries, and criminal prosecutors. In effect, if you experience REM sleep behavior disorder, you act out your dreams. It's different from sleepwalking, in which you have no consciousness of what you're doing. In 2002, a Massachusetts court tried a young male named Adam Jones for having allegedly assaulted in a single night as many as 10 female students in a dormitory at the University of Massachusetts. His attorney, Ralph Pellegrino, assisted by the testimony of a sleep disorder specialist named Mark Pressman, argued that their client had committed these offenses over the course of a single night during an episode of what they likened, for want of any better word, to a form of sleepwalking, and as such, he had not been truly conscious of his actions. Similar behavior had, in fact, affected the defendant's maternal grandfather, who had been forced to lash himself to his bed every night. In less than 2 hours during the trial, the jury acquitted Adam Jones. More skeptical was the judge, who was only persuaded after the sleep expert, Mark Pressman, dramatically produced the published transcript, of which he owned an original copy, of a sensational trial in 1846. In that case, defense attorneys armed with medical testimony had invoked sleepwalking as a diagnosis to acquit the son of a shoe manufacturer who had killed his mistress. The fact that this precedent-setting case had occurred in Massachusetts, where Adam Jones subsequently committed his critical acts 150 years later, also weighed heavily upon the court's decision, having set in the judge's mind a precedent. In my case, I've had 3 episodes of REM sleep behavior disorder. Fortunately, no one has been harmed. Typically, in your dream, you feel that your home is being invaded and that you need to protect your family. Unfortunately, in cases dating back to the Middle Ages, about which I have written an article, there are no such burglars or home invaders. Instead, individuals rush to protect their families, but end up doing harm to one of their children or a spouse. In my case, the most dramatic instance was when I dreamt that I was playing in a game of American football. And I reached out of my bed, sort of like rugby. to tackle my nightstand, only to fall flat on the floor, which caused my wife no shortage of humor, remarking that maybe it was time to dust off our children's bed rails in order to keep me keep me in bed. Fortunately, I have since been prescribed a drug that's very effective in addressing my case of REM sleep behavior disorder. And yet, despite precedents, as I said, going back to the Middle Ages, doubts do persist, especially among judges and criminal prosecutors. But historical examples have continued, as in 1846 and 2002, to verify the legitimacy of this sleep disorder. If not always to verify, let me emphasize the false claims of guilty defendants professing to suffer from its effects. Generally, a defendant has to document a history of this disorder in their family, and also earlier incidents in which no one had been physically harmed, but nonetheless there were witnesses to a defendant previously having acted out in one form or another a dream. I might add that sleep scientists of late likewise have shown interest in probing early instances for greater knowledge of sleep apnea in history, restless leg syndrome, and hypersomnia. But of still greater potential significance to sleep medicine today is the revelation, now 25 years old, that the dominant form of Western sleep prior to the late 19th century, and arguably since time immemorial, was biphasic, also known as segmented, in which two intervals of roughly 3 to 4 hours of sleep were bridged, normally after midnight, by a period of an hour or so of wakefulness. Between an individual's first sleep, as it was termed, and their second sleep, they did practically anything and everything imaginable, from reciting prayers and meditating upon dreams to performing simple chores that did not require much artificial light, and for more than a small handful, committing petty crimes, such as robbing firewood or apples from your neighbor's orchard. With the aid of vast collections of historical data accessible to digital searches, more than 2,000 references to this pattern of sleep have now been discovered over the last 25 years. Additionally, the typical source referred to biphasic sleep as if it was utterly common, not in any need of explanation. It was not viewed as broken sleep, such as being awakened by thunder or some other noise. The earliest known reference dates from Homer's Odyssey, written in either the late 8th or early 7th century BC. In the Aeneid of the 1st century BC, Virgil wrote, and I quote, of early housewives after the first slumber, who call the maids to rise, with yawning mouths and with half-opened eyes, they ply the distaff by the winking light, and to their daily labor add the night. And then after an hour, they would return to their beds to take their second sleep. In later centuries, whether composed in Middle English, French, Spanish, Catalan, Portuguese, German, Polish, Italian, Hungarian, Slovene, Greek, or Latin, references that have either been sent me or that I have found myself using databases, when translated into English, those references almost always read first and second sleep. Not until the 19th century in the Western world, due to technological and cultural forces unleashed by the Industrial Revolution, which segmented sleep gradually become consolidated, seamless, sleeping through the night, as most of us aspire to do today, if not always successfully. Significantly, shifting attitudes during the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, emphasizing productivity, efficiency, and profit, stress that sleep was best confined to a single interval, stealing a march, and I quote, on the day and on one's fellow human beings who are enjoying that second sleep, according to a London writer in 1891. But even more fundamental to sleep's gradual consolidation across the 19th century was the increasing prevalence and sophistication of artificial illumination. First gas, then, of course, electricity in the last decades. Though electricity would still not benefit large numbers of towns and even cities on both sides of the Atlantic until the mid 20th century. But for those who were well-to-do, lived on main streets in major cities such as New York, Baltimore, well-lit streets and homes permitted later bedtimes, leading to sleep's compression. Lighting also had the physiological consequences by its impact on the human body clock lying at the base of our brain, by altering our pattern of sleep. Unprecedented exposure to artificial illumination affected daily rhythms, not least the sleep-wake cycle in humans. So that the Harvard scientist Charles Czeisler has written, every time we turn on an electric light, we are inadvertently taking a drug that affects how we will sleep. The predominance of segmented sleep in Western history has attracted interest within not only the sleep medicine community, but other physicians as well. Concludes one insomnia expert, Greg Jacobs, for most of evolution, we slept in a certain way. Waking up during the night is part of normal human physiology. In the journal Oncology Times, a Stanford physician pondered the potential relevance to the treatment of cancer patients, 45% of whom evidently suffer from sleeplessness. The potential relevance, as he wrote, of the discovery, quote, that we all sleep abnormally, at least in historical terms. Of collateral significance is that numerous people who suffer from what is often referred to as middle of the night insomnia, which is the most widespread form of insomnia and the most prevalent sleep complaint in many countries today, they may in fact be experiencing a form of this older, long dominant pattern of sleep. Not until the end of the 19th century, and as I've said, sleep's consolidation, did physicians steadily begin to pathologize nocturnal wakefulness. Awakening at night became conflated with the failure to fall asleep at bedtime, known as sleep onset insomnia. They were merged in the eyes of physicians at the turn of the 19th century into the common scourge of insomnia. Segmented sleep, very likely, however, has never entirely disappeared, representing instead, as I have argued in print, a persistent echo of the past, as an immature product of modernity. Consolidated sleep, sleeping through the night, may be intrinsically unstable and thus vulnerable to disruption. Further, the transition from segmented sleep, dominant in all likelihood for thousands of years, would likely require more than one or even 2 centuries to fully run its course. Not that a rigorous clinical comparison would, were it possible, demonstrate that middle of the night insomnia is identical to its pre-industrial precursor, segmented sleep, or that in all such instances of wakefulness in the middle of the night, any such relationship between past and present exists. Here I need to emphasize that though I have a PhD from Johns Hopkins University, that PhD was not in medicine, it was in history. So if anyone asks for medical advice from me, I immediately say, see your doctor. I'm not a physician, even though I have read widely over the last 20 years. And yet, though changes in technology, cultural values, diet, environmental conditions, and economic activity would likely suggest an imperfect resemblance between middle of the night insomnia and segmented sleep from past centuries. What remains compelling is that so many persons, not unlike individuals as recently as the 19th century, continue at night to experience a period of nocturnal wakefulness. Moreover, this knowledge has the potential, by lessening anxiety, especially among those who have no explanation that a physician can give them as to why they are waking up in the middle of the night. By lessening anxiety, such information, any number of people have told me, both patients and physicians, that it enables individuals to fall back asleep more readily than think themselves abnormal. The most common term that people have referred to in sending me emails is that they think themselves freaks, that there's something hopelessly wrong with them because they're waking up in the middle of the night. I'd say over the last 10 years, maybe a dozen newspaper columns throughout the world have been written by people who have regarded themselves as insomniacs. And yet, these newspaper columnists take delight in learning that very likely their sleep, from an historical perspective, is more normal than the modern consolidated slumber that we aspire to achieve today. To take but one example, after years of anxiety spent battling, quote, the unbearable problem of middle of the night wakefulness, an Australian journalist wrote in her column several years ago for the newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald. After years of unbearable anxiety, the most effective remedy, she wrote, for me was history, and one that continues to work today. Russell Foster, director of the Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute at Oxford University, states flatly, many people wake up at night and panic. I tell them that they are experiencing what they're experiencing is a throwback to a bimodal, biphasic sleep pattern. A final contribution of the past to our understanding of sleep pertains to the standards by which sleep today is typically evaluated. Human health is undoubtedly the most critical measure for judging any form of sleep. Furthermore, the quality of our physical and mental well-being today, a comprehensive study in a journal called Sleep Health has recently shown, is best achieved by sleeping continuously through the night. Yet human health, from an historical perspective, has not always been the sole measure for gauging sleep's blessings. Nor is our health the only relevant standard even today, particularly if sleep is judged by non-quantifiable criteria. This in no way is to suggest or to question the medical importance of sleeping seamlessly through the night. Rather, it's simply to ask whether there are not still other ways, as history suggests, by which to evaluate the significance of sleep's role in everyday life. Before the Industrial Revolution, for instance, Western households derived diverse benefits from their biphasic pattern of sleep. Most obviously in this age, darkness combined with fewer distractions and less noise provided an unrivaled opportunity between one's first and second sleep for, as I've already suggested, prayer, meditation, and contemplation. Then hath thy soul the least encumbrance, wrote an English moralist, Francis Quarles, of the period following, quote, the end of thy first sleep. The 17th century theologian Isaac Barrow occasionally would compose sermons, quote, after his first sleep, rise, light, and after burning out his candle, as he put it, return to bed before day. Martin Luther, on the other hand, claimed to be regularly visited at night by Satan. As he wrote in a letter, almost every night when I wake up, the devil is there and wants to dispute with me. I instantly chase him away with a fart. Upon waking at night, the 18th century poet Alexander Pope, if seized suddenly by a creative impulse after his first sleep, quickly roused his servant from bed, even in the depths of winter, quote, for the purpose of writing down a thought which Pope feared to lose and might have escaped him when he awakened again. Night, until the mid-19th century, for many Western and non-Western cultures, offered a secluded interlude in which to absorb, retain, and reflect upon dreams, including individuals who claim to visit while asleep distant or deceased loved ones in their dreams, thereby providing them with a degree of solace in what was an age of very high mortality. A Venetian rabbi recorded a reunion in a dream with his late mother. "Very soon you will be with me," she informed him. In the Americas, some slaves in their dreams flew home to West Africa at night of a trip guided by, quote, "a good spirit." A New England slave recounted, "At length we arrived at the African coast and came in sight of the Niger and ultimately reached his village from which he had been stolen." Less enamored of nocturnal visions, the author of a pamphlet in 1674 titled "The New Art of Thriving" warned his readers, "What a shame it is to spend half one's lifetime in dreams and slumbers. Leave your bed thereof when first sleep hath left you, lest custom render your body sluggish, or which is worse, your mind a cage of unclean thoughts." What a powerful metaphor. I am not well versed in the writing of Foucault, but that observation, I think, would please him very much. Despite that advice, for nearly 2 more centuries, the author's suggestion to forsake a second sleep, not for 2 more centuries would it acquire a following in Europe and America. Again, during the Industrial Revolution. Then, too, medical texts as early as the Middle Ages frequently specified the interval after one's first sleep as a preferred time to ingest pills, potions, and elixirs. 20 medical books in a variety of European languages that I've surveyed, published in the 17th and 18th centuries, contain such references in what was an early, albeit primitive, form of what physicians refer to today as chronopharmacology, or call circadian medicine. In short, knowing that their patients should imbibe a particular medicine when, during the day or the night, it is thought to be most powerful. My understanding is that this is not uncommon among some patients who suffer from forms of cancer. That is important when indeed they are administered chemotherapy or some other medical treatment in terms of its effectiveness. Medical literature for many years also recommended this interval of wakefulness in the middle of the night for sexual intercourse of a patient in Florence. A physician in the 12th century advised, let him not abstain entirely from intercourse, but let him enjoy it when it can be very pleasurable and after the first sleep. But let him not engage in it too frequently. Noting the large numbers of children in peasant households, the 16th century French physician Laurent Joubert wrote that bone-weary laborers, too exhausted after coming home from a day's work in the fields, that they frequently engaged in intercourse, quote, after the first sleep, when, and I quote, in his words, they have more enjoyment and do it better. Years later, in 1826, the physician Joseph Briand similarly counseled, not every season, every moment of the day is equally conducive to the accomplishment of this conjugal act. The night is generally more suitable than the day, and the moment of waking after the first sleep is preferable to any other hour because all the organs are then rested from the day's work. No doubt many of you are aware of some writers and artists today, if subject to wakefulness in the dead of night, that they embrace this interval as a time when they feel most creative and their imaginations least constrained, a sensation similar perhaps to that experienced by the novelist Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote in the mid-1800s of awakening, and I quote, from a midnight slumber. If, he continued to write, you could choose an hour of wakefulness out of the whole night, it would be this. You have found an intermediate space where the business of life does not intrude. Echoed Robert Louis Stevenson, no more perfect hour, in his opinion, who, after his first interval of sleep, as he put it, felt liberated from the Bastille of civilization. Biphasic sleep, segmented sleep, as late as the 20th century, and in some instances yet today, has also served a variety of purposes among non-Western populations. To judge from the observations of early anthropologists and foreign travelers from the late 19th century to the latter half of the 20th century, some traditional cultures bereft of artificial lighting still experienced first and second sleep. From Maroons in Suriname on the northeastern coast of South America to the Tiv, subsistence farmers in central Nigeria who, when visited by an anthropologist in the 1950s, were found to use terms identical in their own language to first and second sleep. Of the Wuwa Indians in Central America, a British anthropologist wrote, frequently at night after the first sleep, the men would gather around the fires from their respective quarters in the lodge and as they warmed themselves in the flames from the chill of the night air, would enjoy some yarn with a quiet chuckle. From a pragmatic perspective, among the benefits served by biphasic sleep was the protection, which still exists, that late night activity in villages provided against the intrusion of predators, not unlike the security afforded in early European towns and cities, not against lions and leopards, but the fearsome threat posed by fire, against which wakeful citizens were expected as a civic duty to be on guard. None of this, again, is to emphasize, to argue that we should no longer aspire to sleep seamlessly through the night, or for that matter, that middle of the night insomniacs typically have a reason to prefer having their sleep broken. Rather, I've sought to suggest, principally from the perspective of the past, that standards other than those solely designed to evaluate human health have long existed for assessing sleep's diverse contributions, and that for hundreds of years, even thousands of years, waking naturally in the dead of night was often thought a blessing rather than a curse. This pattern of sleep, notwithstanding its medical deficiencies today, has suited the priorities of innumerable generations and diverse cultures, all the more in light of deeply held convictions such as the necessity of prayer and the power of dreams that acquired sacred resonance in the middle of the night. After all, it stands to reason that different forms of sleep have generated different criteria for assessing their value. Put more broadly, history, given its vast, diverse domain, can serve a number of important functions in advancing our understanding of human slumber, from challenging conventional beliefs to illuminating other forms of sleep that today are ordinarily thought abnormal. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Many thank you. Thank you for sharing, actually. I mean, thanks for sharing your research and your findings, obviously, but as well for sharing your personal experience with sleep disorders and I mean, experience of the night, I'd say, in the broader sense. Well, I will ask people around just in case they have any questions. Thanks in advance for a brilliant talk. I really enjoyed it a lot. I hope the rest of the attendees also enjoyed it. So, give me a.
If I may interrupt,
yeah,
I do deeply regret not having an adequate knowledge of Spanish, which I have to confess extends also to French and German. The one language that I like to think I excelled at in high school was Latin, but no one speaks Latin anymore. So that's my predicament.
That's a problem, yeah. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos los que siguen conectados. Hemos perdido algunos en el transcurso, pero también entiendo que tienen sus ocupaciones. El profesor Roger hizo una labor fabulosa pasando desde el tipo de documentos que consultó, el archivo histórico que consultó, el tipo de actividades que identificó durante la noche, padecimientos que identificó durante la noche. Y bueno, concluyó con esta visión que yo creo que varios, y quiero pensar, varios ya habíamos escuchado de ella, del sueño bifásico. Y cómo estos hallazgos pueden informar a la práctica de la medicina del sueño. No sé si alguno de ustedes quiera preguntarle a Roger algo, al que tengan alguna duda. Pueden preguntarle lo que quieran, ya sea en inglés, en español. Federica y yo podemos traducir. Y de igual forma podemos traducir, si lo consideran necesario, la respuesta del doctor Roger. Y bueno, ya tenemos a alguien aquí que quiere preguntar, pero, antes de empezar esta sesión de preguntas y respuestas, Federica me indica que tenemos un anuncio que hacer.
Así es, un anuncio muy importante, yo creo, para todos ustedes. El anuncio es que para ese segundo ciclo de conferencias hemos previsto la posibilidad de otorgar constancias de asistencia a ustedes, los participantes, los que asisten. Y a este fin les pediré que se registren, les acabo de mandar en el chat una liga a uno de esos formularios en línea. El formulario es súper sencillo, solo tienen que llenarnos cuantos pocos datos. Y si logran asistir a por lo menos 3, ¿verdad? Sí, 3 de las 4 conferencias que tenemos planeadas para ese semestre, pues ahí les daremos su constancia de asistencia. A lo largo de cada una de las sesiones les haré, o sea, lo que acabo de hacer, es decir, pasarles la liga, así que de esa manera vamos a poder llevar un registro de los que nos siguen fielmente. Con eso ya me callo y dejo el espacio para las preguntas y respuestas.
Y a ver, aquí tenemos a Eric que nos pregunta, ¿nos quieres preguntar algo? Por favor.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes. Y bueno, yo tengo como una pregunta para el doctor. Y bueno, como, a ver, taking out what you mentioned about artificial light and how it affected our biological clock, how could the people who dedicate themselves to the area of health improve our sleep quality? Since many times we have a lot of work to do and activities that require us to be in front of a screen.
Eric, para que los demás podamos también seguir tu pregunta, ¿nos la podrías repetir en español?
Sí, perdón, es que... bueno, es que el profesor mencionó que no hablaba español.
Sí,
pero,
sí, no, pero para el resto de los asistentes.
Sí, perdón, como las personas que nos dedicamos como al área de la salud en general como estudiantes o lo que sea, que muchas veces tenemos que desvelarnos o como que pasar pues gran parte de nuestro tiempo y pues también puede ser como de nuestro, sí, como sacrificar como que esta parte de nuestro sueño para pues las actividades que tenemos que hacer. y pues estamos como que mucho tiempo expuestos a este tipo de luz azul de los dispositivos. ¿Qué podríamos como que hacer o, ajá, para pues como que mejorar nuestra calidad de sueño?
Okay, Roger, I don't know if you got the question or not, but it's basically about people who study medicine or have these busy schedules where they have to stay up until late and be exposed to artificial light and other technological devices. So basically the question is if you have any advice on how they could take care of their sleep or biological needs. I know this is a medical question, but feel free to respond.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm glad you pointed out that that I have no training in medicine. But I do read what those who are physicians write. And if the question, if I understand correctly, forgive me if I don't, is how to react to if you think you have middle of the night insomnia. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I do advise anyone with a medical question to see their physician. Beyond that, there's do seem to be steps that sleep physicians agree upon if you routinely wake up in the middle of the night. First of all, leave your bed. The bed should be associated with only two things, sleep and connubial bliss. Become all the more frustrated that you're unable to fall back to sleep and that you have no explanation for why you are remaining awake. In which case, leave your bed, select something to read, hopefully of no particular interest. In other words, a boring book, and read under relatively low light. And for that matter, not only do you want to avoid bright light, but any electronic device, such as a laptop or a video game or watching television. And I would hope, again, I'm speaking solely as an historian based upon what I think is very compelling evidence, that you may well be experiencing a what Dr. Foster referred to as a throwback to what had been the dominant pattern of sleep for you're not abnormal. Your sleep is not abnormal. That may be small comfort, but you're not a freak. And I will add that it's been very fulfilling to me that a number of physicians have adopted my point of view. Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston refers to this. If you wake up in the middle of the night, do not feed your anxiety, but tell yourself that what you're experiencing has a very long historical foundation. I routinely give a video, a 1 hour long video. I need to update it to the online sleep medicine program at Oxford for physicians and nurses wanting to get a master's in sleep medicine. My subject, let me stress, is not medical. I talk about the history and the anthropology of sleep, but so far they haven't cut me off. They still show the video. So I must be doing something halfway right. This is, if I can add a personal note, is very fulfilling for me, because I struggled to get a B when in high school in any science, including chemistry. I was the person in the back row who could barely turn on his Bunsen burner, you know? So maybe I've just undermined everything I've said for the last hour. But people far smarter than me and with a far greater aptitude than me have been very supportive, and that's been has meant a lot to me.
This is quite an achievement, especially to keep up with the medical community. You know, like keep these lessons going. So it's not a minor issue. Congratulations. So we have several other.
I'm sorry, Professor Silva. Are you asking? Is this? Has it been adopted by the medical community, or?
No. It's just I'm saying it is remarkable that you are still giving these talks to the. I'm saying it is remarkable that you are still giving these talks to the medical community at Oxford. So congratulations.
Well, gracias.
Okay, so we do have some questions on the chat. I will read them to you, if it's okay for you, Roger. I will read the question and you can answer. Just tell me if you prefer to answer each question separately, or if you prefer I read them all and you answer them all. Which one?
Probably separately.
Okay.
My memory is better than that of our president, Joe Biden, but and
Still,
I have not yet
we
retired.
don't want to challenge it.
But sometimes you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, we do, totally. We get you. So the first question is by Israel, who is asking, in your opinion, what technology has had the most impact on the way we sleep, and why might we overlook the psychological importance of sleep and dreams?
Excellent question. Artificial illumination, which many historians of science view as the notwithstanding nuclear energy, artificial illumination as the most important breakthrough in the modern world. It has reclaimed, apart from its impact on sleep, when you think about it, it has reclaimed anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of our daily lives. Now, that's not always a benefit, as I was saying before, for those of us, including myself, who stay up later than we should. But you all have heard the expression 24/7 society. We do indeed live in a high wattage world. It distresses me to learn that the United States Army is perfecting a pill that will keep its soldiers awake for a week at a time. Think about it. We're already losing the beauty of the night sky. 300 years ago, people could see roughly 2,500 stars. Certainly there are places where you still can, but they are rapidly disappearing. Night runs the risk of losing its identity. Already, in the United States, at least, over 20% of the population work at night, and that is not good. Working at night, if I may make another medical observation from everything I read, does not have a healthy impact on the body. Now, not to be naive, I know a lot of people don't have a choice whether to work at night or not, including a daughter of mine. But when I say that night runs the risk of losing its original identity, regardless of whether artificial illumination lights the skies 24 hours a day, we are increasingly doing things that were once relegated to 12 hours a day, right? Think of all the stores that are open and television programs. And I don't mean to be a hypocrite. Certainly, there have been times when we've needed to go out to a grocery store at 2 a.m. in the morning. But nighttime is no longer is invested, at least in many cultures, with the sacred importance that it once was, and it no longer confers the privacy that it once did to individuals before the Industrial Revolution, when privacy did not exist during the day, unless you lived in a very remote rural area. Neighbors were constantly interested in what others were doing. Gossip was widespread. The one way to avoid it was to meet with your boyfriend or girlfriend or at night and wear white so that you could be better identified. And never travel alone. That invited problems. Never whistle in the dark. Many cultures believe that that summoned demons if you whistled in the dark. There was a whole code of etiquette and behavior which was designed to safeguard individuals even on the darkest nights if they wish to leave their homes. But I'm digressing. I'm getting off on another subject. I don't know if I answered the first question, but do you have another? I'll try to do better.
No, you're doing great. This is so interesting. We do have more questions. Next one is from Lucia Granados, who is, thanking you very much and asking, in the files you consulted, was there any concern about insomnia? And if so, what behavior was qualified as insomnia?
There are two forms, generally. Sleep onset insomnia, whereby, as I think I said briefly, individuals have a hard time falling asleep in the first place. And then more prevalent, more common is middle of the night insomnia, also called, at least by the British, sleep maintenance insomnia. And I think in most, at least industrial societies, middle of the night insomnia is more common. I'm sure that your newspapers, in fact, I've come across some because they quote me that refer to epidemics of insomnia today. And it's not a very popular point to make, but I do include myself that we really do only have ourselves to blame. We need to get more sleep than we do. Alcohol used to be thought a way for people who could not afford laudanum, which was a mixture of opium and alcohol that the upper classes relied upon to put themselves to sleep at night. Alcohol was for others, but as alcohol, and I'm sure I'm not divulging a secret here, or nor am I mean to show anyone any disrespect. I mean, I have had evenings of drinking alcohol and then going to bed, and what I discover is what other people discover. It will keep you asleep for a couple hours, and then it will wake you up, and you won't be able to sleep for the rest of the night. So it's not a very effective. Don't please quote me, not that I'm endorsing laudanum, far from it. It could get me fired. In all seriousness, alcohol, unless medicine that is prescribed for you at night, caffeine should be avoided, as should a heavy meal close to bedtime. And that advice, which has not been contradicted, is as old as the Middle Ages. But if in doubt, ask a real doctor.
es algo, ¿no?
Le damos la palabra a él.
Sí,
Ed, ¿quieres compartirnos tu pregunta?
I'm sorry, is
Sí,
that a question for?
justo. Um, well, first of all, thank you so much for your, for the whole thing, because, as you said, I too, well, I'm a victim as well of insomnia, and exactly the part you said about not feeling like a freak or feeling like, what am I doing wrong? I guess that it do relieves part of the anxiety um, of, well, having to deal with insomnia. Also, I guess that I have a lot of comments, but my principal doubt is this one. I had already read about well, sleep in general, and I remember that this term related to biphasic sleep was, what I had understood was that, for example, we will basically sleep from, our 8 hours during the night, and then we have another period of sleep. Well, that would, well, that we would sleep around 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon after having our meal. And that's what I understood as biphasic, that we would have, okay.
You're totally correct.
Okay.
The biphasic sleep that I'm referring to today is that which takes place at night. But as we all know, there are any number of cultures still that have midday naps, siestas.
Exactly.
I remember reading 5 years ago, I think it was the mayor of Madrid who got into a lot of trouble when she tried to ban siestas and encourage everybody to work through the day. I'm not sure how that turned out. And maybe she was turned out as mayor. It was very controversial at the time. Some corporations, including, I believe, Microsoft, and some in Japan I've read of, they have come around to believing that sleep deprivation is a very real threat to the productivity of their workers. And so they do create rooms with beds whereby you can take a nap and hopefully recharge yourself. Hopefully, they used to be called, when I was younger, power naps. Whether they still are or not, I don't know. But the point is not to sleep for several hours, but for maybe 15 to 30 minutes. One major corporation in Japan, this was instituted by the president of the corporation. And there were, throughout this high-rise building, sleep rooms where people could go. But you know what? No one went. No one went. Why? Because they feared that they would be thought lazy if they left their desks. Whereas if they nodded off while working hard during the day, that was an honor because they were such hard workers that they could not stay awake. I don't know what's happened to those sleeping rooms, but the president himself did not even use any that he instituted. In the United States, the corporation instituted some, as I referred to. I think it may have been Microsoft. And maybe I should not repeat this. I honestly forget the name of the corporation, but it was a major Silicon Valley corporation that instituted, with the best intentions, sleeping rooms for people, again, to take a nap, a short nap, and come back to work feeling better. The problem is that workers, I'll let your own imaginations fill in the blank. Workers use these rooms for purposes other than sleep.
Oh.
And at first they had windows, the doors. So it became a catastrophe. What happened, I have no idea. But it didn't go well. Let me just say that.
Okay, that's such an interesting outcome. Quite a twist in the plot. So we do have a couple of book recommendations I would like to very rapidly, briefly read. The first one is from Aurelia Cortez, who is suggesting this wonderful book named El Don de la Siesta, the gift of the siesta, the gift of the nap, by Miguel Ángel Fernández, published by Anagrama. It is a sort of elegy of the siesta, and it touches upon the ideas around productivity and sleep, and the stigma of sleeping during the day.
Mm.
So thank you very much, Aurelia, for this great recommendation. And Ed, as well as Alba, recommends us the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Por si les interesa saber más, I believe you know that, Roger.
He teaches at Stanford, I think.
Yeah.
That book has, let me just say that in terms of the number of copies that book has sold, we aren't talking about differences of 100 or 1,000 between that and what I've written. He has more digits in the number of books that he has sold. It's wildly popular, and I think the last time I looked, he had sold something like 70,000 copies. So
congratulations
for any author, that is a tremendous number. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, and then we have a very interesting question I'd like to pose you. It's a question from Andrea, well, another Andrea, and she says, I was wondering if there are any accounts on the establishment of European sleep patterns in colonial settings, such as Mexico.
I'm sorry, I heard colonial sleep patterns.
European sleep patterns in colonial context, colonial settings.
Oh, well, I can tell you that that there are books and articles underway. One by a Latin American historian, a Brazilian historian at Columbia University, who is completing a book about night and sleep, I believe, based on Brazil. which I have not kept in touch with her. There used to be a group of us that would get together and Zoom every 2 months or so. But I have no doubt that it will appear, and I have every reason to think that the demand, the interest should be such that it would be translated into both Spanish and Portuguese. I served on the committee, the dissertation committee of a woman at in the University of Lisbon, but she was not pursuing a colonial subject. She was focused instead on lighting and nighttime and sleep in Lisbon, which was quite different from other European countries, Portugal, in the sense that I believe it was the king who was very much opposed to artificial lighting. So at the same time as other countries were lighting up more and more streets, Portugal, at least for 20 or so years, refused to do so. This was also took place in Rome. I forget which pope it was in the early 19th century who regarded it as a sacrilege to invade nocturnal darkness, which should be reserved for worshiping the deity. There was another pope, let me just, earlier, who, or future pope, who the cardinals came one night upon the death of the former pope, this is a true story, to inform him that he had been elected the new pope of the church. And he criticized them for doing this at night. Again, because night, the darkness, was meant to be sacred. So he turned them away. And the next morning, they selected someone else.
Okay.
So we have one more question in here, and it says, it's from Mireya. Why do you think the mindset of being productive and sleep late at night for work is still normal, even when we know that it is bad for our health?
Yes.
I mean, in a human thinking way.
Yes. And unlike before the Industrial Revolution, when many people had to work at night, in fact, there were some jobs that could only be performed at night. Commonly today, at least from what I have read, and I'm sure this is, many of us have done this, including myself. I don't have to stay up at night to work. I'm not going to lose my job. There'll be food on the table tomorrow, hopefully. But we're ambitious. And that quotation from 1891, it used a strange expression: steal a march on the day and your fellow workers who remain in bed to take a second sleep. In other words, forgoing a second sleep is the way to get ahead, waking up early, or in this case, going to bed late. And but of course, it's the rare individual, from my experience, whose mental ability improves after 10 p.m. It's been shown again by Russell Foster, whom I've quoted, who is really one of the top sleep experts in the world, that if you stay up until 5 a.m. in the morning, you will have less command over your thinking, your cognitive ability, than if you were arrested at 9 p.m. for drunken driving. In other words, your ability to think is worse for want of sleep. Not that he's endorsing drunken driving, but your ability to work, to think, is worse given such a tremendous lack of sleep.
Yeah, so we have another 3 more questions, although I think we actually will just cut it to narrow them to 2, because we have we are over the time, so
may I I'm happy to answer any today, but I would invite anyone to email me if they have a question. I can't necessarily guarantee a correct answer, but I'll do my best.
Well, that's very kind of you. So, okay. Cualquiera que tenga más preguntas pueden mandarle un correo al doctor Roger Ekirch. Por lo pronto, le voy a dar la palabra a Emanuel. Emanuel, ¿quieres compartirnos tu pregunta?
Claro, gracias. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
¿Escuchan?
Sí, sí.
Okay. Well, I was, I found interesting about productivity, and yet I think that's actually some kind of threat for us, like being workers or students, and it could be interesting to know how the electronic devices will be implemented on our lives when we work or when we study. I work from home, and I am attached like 10 hours to screens a day. And what I found, what is working for me now is to reduce the distractors, to reduce the notification at some point in the night and go to sleep. And at first, it was like hard for me, and it gave me some anxiety. Because I was thinking, like, what if I don't see some important notification about some close person? Maybe they need like something for me. And that made me anxious at first, but now it is like the best thing that I could have done to reduce my sleep disorders. And now I don't even need an alarm to wake up in the morning. I sleep my 8 hours a day at night, and it has been working for me. So I'm sorry. The question is, what do you think could be the best way to implement these electronic devices in our lives in order to not be affected in our productivity at work or at school?
I'm sorry. I'm delighted to hear that you get 8 hours of sleep to begin with. But are you asking if that's the proper length or what? I know that you're asking about schools, and sleeping rooms are being implemented at some universities as well. But forgive me, I didn't.
I believe
No.
he.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, well, what do you think it could be the best way to balance our lives between the time we spend on electronic devices and the time that we sleep? I think I do it by reducing our distractors, like notifications on these devices. But I mean, historically, or what should be the next step that you think could be improved our lives by using these devices?
Such as the Pelotron?
So yeah, I think he's basically asking about if you have any recommendations regarding when and how to use the electronic devices so they don't mess with our sleep.
I would say stop if you are able. And again, this is just my personal belief from what I've read, but I would not use any, though so many of us do, myself included. I would try to stop an hour before going to bed. And because it does affect our, I don't quite understand the physics, but part of it is the light that these devices emit, the blue light. And there are ways, I think, to guard against this. But in general, I think it's fair to say that pretty much anything that stimulates the senses is not a good idea close to or anything mechanical that stimulates the senses is I personally would discourage, but because you're stimulated, and you know, it's like going to bed and trying to resolve a problem perhaps from work, and oftentimes it's difficult to fall asleep because you keep trying to solve that problem. I try to think of things that are maybe problems relating to what I'm writing, but for me, I enjoy the mystery, and I don't get frustrated if I don't find an answer. If I find an answer, normally I've forgotten it the following morning anyway. So when there was a reference to students, I remember reading not long ago that and it had to do with sleep deprivation among students. And this student at Columbia University was asked, do you have a problem getting enough sleep? And her response was, at Columbia, you can sleep, you can have a social life, and you can study, but you can't do all three. Now, I thought that rather extreme, and I would not would not endorse that. But it did surprise me that unless being a student has become much more difficult today than I remember it, and maybe it is, it didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Should we end the session? Yes. We can read just one more question. Okay, one more question. We will answer shortly. Okay, one more question and with a short answer. Yeah, so Victor Hugo is asking, I wonder if the sleep issues can disturb or alter the correct decisions made by any person in a bad way. So do sleep issues actually alter the way we are making decisions?
I would think so. Lack of sleep. I tell people, and I think this is true, not that many of us have the time, but no one has ever died from too much sleep. Whereas the opposite is true.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? Forgive me if I didn't answer the question directly, but I do feel strongly about this. Somehow, having written about biphasic sleep and the publicity that it's attracted, people think that I endorse it. That even if you sleep through the night, that this is something that you should aim for. No. Only if you want to go off and live in a log cabin in the Canadian Yukon without any electricity. It takes 3 weeks to be without artificial lighting to have your sleep have any hope of becoming biphasic. But I totally agree with sleep physicians far more smarter than I am that it is best for our health cognitively and physically to sleep through the night. Now, if someone subscribes to a religion who wants to wake in the middle of the night, and I know there are a number, that's their decision. But purely on the basis of health, it's best to sleep through the night if you are able to. If you are able to.
Well, yeah.
Now, yes.
Now let's come. Now we are ready to say goodbye. So we really want to thank you, Roger. Some people have messaged me saying this has been a great session, that they really enjoyed it. And so I think this has been a huge success. Yeah, so I see some hearts around. So
the only improvement for me would have been to have come to Mexico City, and I can pay my own way. I get money from my university, so
really?
maybe in 4 years I will have thought of something new that you all would be gracious enough to extend another invitation.
We would love to have you here, of course. So we'll stay in touch. Yes, we will. Do not doubt it.
I know your names.
Yes. And now you know where to find
And
us.
I have your email addresses.
Yes.
And speaking of email addresses, I was serious when I said, anyone feel free to email me. I'll try to answer as best I can. I am only one of 4 people in the world. This is true with my last name. Now, there are other people to whom I am related in France and elsewhere, but they spell the last name somewhat differently. And this began 200 years ago. So it's not that I don't have family elsewhere, but my wife and 2 of our children are the only ones who use the last name. And my point of saying that is, if you Google my last name, there's no escaping me.
Okay.
It'll be easy to find. It'd be easier than me saying what my email address is now.
Excellent. Yeah. Sí, confirmo. Es sencillo encontrar el correo electrónico de Roger. Y bueno, los vamos a mantener al tanto de las siguientes sesiones. La próxima es... La próxima sesión... ¿Sí me escuchan? Ya perdí totalmente... No lo sé. ¿Escuchan a Federica?
Sí.
Sí. Sí, pues excelente. La próxima sesión va a ser el 11 de abril. El 11 de abril. Ajá, y tenemos una pequeña sorpresa porque se supone, si todo sale bien, que en la próxima sesión vamos a presentar un libro que acaba de editarse, que acaba de salir sobre antropología de los estados oníricos. Entonces, se los recomiendo a todos y a todas ustedes que están interesados en esos temas. Sí, les haremos circular también el programa del seminario lo pueden también consultar en la página web, pero de cualquier forma les hacemos circular el programa. Y de nuevo agradecemos a Roger que haya estado aquí. Vamos a tener también dentro de 3 meses, we are having also Lenka Medvedkova as a guest soon. So I will let you know in case you want to join the seminar. So
By all
okay,
means,
then.
my pleasure.
Excellent. Muy bien, a todos. Muchísimas gracias por unirse a esta sesión. De verdad estamos muy contentas de haberlos tenido a todos aquí.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.